So here's the plan today. I just had a few slides I wanted to go through very quickly. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll introduce our esteemed panel. As Angie mentioned, there's some very esteemed people on the panel, some people I've known for, more than 20 years, right? So, if there was such a thing as the BC Tech Hall of Fame, some of them would be in it. So,
there is a BC Tech Hall of Fame. Started it last year.
Then why aren't we in it? So, first of all, let me. So, my goal today is talk about, I guess the buzzword is commercialization or monetization, but I want to take a very practical standpoint of how you go off and start this company, you get a patent, and then how does that change your life, and how can you, to put it another way, milk that patent for as much as it's worth for as long as you can. And there'll be some stories from the panel, but I'll give you a bit of a framework, and just for the hell of it, because I'm a data nerd, I went and searched how many BC companies patented something and raised angel or venture capital in the last 10 years. So I'll give you a little snapshot of the industry. So this gray hair has been well earned, and I've been an entrepreneur for over 35 years. Actually, probably longer, because my first commercial software product was released in 1979. So that's how old I am. I've had 5 exits. I've had 1 patent where I was the inventor. I've also had many of my companies have patents. I've been a VC for 3 years. I've been a growth advisor for over 15, advising probably close to 1,000 companies on their growth strategy, and been quite active at helping a number of them raise over $10 million. I've been an angel investor for over 20 years. I've had 3 exits from angel investments, and I've been the investment banker for the last 7 years, and in that time done over $1 billion of transactions for Canadian tech companies. So I come from this from starting as a geek and then turning into this finance bro that helps people with money. And I see how those patents have a role in all of those stages. Does this work? There. Oh, wrong one. Okay. So we all start with an idea. That idea leads to initial patent. The story I'm going to tell is a really simple one. That's one startup, one patent, because that's easier to tell the story. I know all the IP experts love to talk about patent families and this and that, but let's just keep it simple in this story, that there's one. I know that most of the people here have had more than 7, so I'm sure they'll cover that. Then after you have that idea, then you need to come up with your master plan to take over the world. I always talk about this NAPCAN to NASDAQ transition from that initial idea and how you have to raise lots of money. But your first patent crosses a number of those borders, and that's your first challenge, right? That you apply for one and then get a patent after perhaps several funding rounds have occurred. So that story is an evolving story where you don't even know if you're actually going to get the patent. That's the first challenge you take as an entrepreneur. So here's that snapshot I promised of the 250 BC companies in the last 10 years that have used a patent and leveraged that to raise financing. And you can see the different categories in which they appear and how much money that is. And then let me show you in color. Most of them were ICT companies. The next biggest category was healthcare and life science. Then it's business products and services, consumer products and services, energy, and materials and resources. And if you're really curious, there's the sample logos of all the companies in IT, in healthcare, business products, consumer products, energy, materials, resources. Okay? So that idealized story about getting a patent is there's this promise of this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? You initially apply for the patent, you raise some money from a bunch of investors that are excited about that patent. You get the patent, and then everything turns out great, right? That's what we're all sold as entrepreneurs, right? It doesn't always work out this way. So the reality-based explanation from my experience in my companies, and these panelists may differ and argue a bit of that, was that it really comes down to this. So on the left here, I have what I would call my IP flywheel, that this is a number of different ways by having a patent, I can leverage it for my company to generate cash for my business. So it starts with having that it is an innovation keystone and that all of your R&D leveraged off of that. Then it goes to stimulating fundraising, to validation for the early customer, to allow you to have thought leadership because you have something unique in the marketplace that people can't replicate, to attracting partners, to giving you pricing power. That means people that have protected IP in theory can charge more for their products than people that don't have them. Differentiation when you're scaling up. So that first customer, you haven't crossed a chasm, you cross a chasm into a rapidly growing market. The company that people will choose will be the one that has the coolest IP. It's a role in your valuation at exit. People buy your company. And then the more you spin this, the more you milk it, right? That's the stuff of, where it's really tangible that you can actually plan for and then you can work. But you have to work it. It's not a field of dreams where you get the patent and then the money starts flowing in. You have to work it. And then on the right-hand side, this stuff I learned the hard way, that there's unintended ways to monetize as you go. And actually, at least one of these I learned from you, Barry, which is, you can license technology into other markets that maybe you're not pursuing. You can make a joint venture or form a consortium with a bunch of other companies using your IP as contribution to that business venture. And you can sell a patent to a patent fund. And I was lucky enough the patent I was an inventor was sold to a patent fund for $2 million, which was actually a much better result than I had for that particular company. So, sometimes a patent is very important. So here's our panel, and they're all sitting nicely as I have the pictures on the thing. And as a person that's an investment banker helping tech companies, one of the things I help them with is their bios, but I'm going to read their bios as they came because I can more easily sell their companies if they let me write the bio instead of they write the bio. Because there's something weird that goes on when you write a bio that you make it generic and you're afraid to be boastful. If I'm selling your company, I want to boast how great you are, right? And these guys are pretty great. So I'll read Barry's. Barry Jinks is a seasonal entrepreneur and technologist with extensive experience in founding and leading technology companies. He's currently pursuing a PhD in engineering at UBC with a focus on AI and machine learning. He has a deep understanding of strategic importance of building defensible IP through a company's lifecycle. His insights draw from a career that includes founding legal networks, spectrum signal processing, to significant market success and sitting on several industry, government, and nonprofit boards. Bijan Sani is CEO and founder of Ineco Systems, leader in payment, fraud detection, and prevention, brings more than 30 years experience as a technology industry executive in BC. Before joining Ineco, Bijan was executive chair at UB Video and provided leadership that culminated in the acquisition of the company by Scientific Atlanta. He was previously CEO of Infowave Software. See, that's way back. I remember that. Driving Infowave's IPO and strategic partnership agreements with Intel, Compaq, and other technology industry leaders, and has served as a director on the AceTech CEO Association and the Dr. Peter AIDS Foundation. Steph Rose, who I just met yesterday, is the Chief Strategy Officer at Rololyptic Technologies. For those of you who don't know Rololyptic, they're in the providing technology into the oil and gas space. where she has played a pivotal role in growing the company from a small team to 16 members. She has been instrumental in securing investment income through Series A and extension rounds and more than $4 million non-dilutive funding. With a robust background, sustainable business strategy, Steph has implemented key corporate systems and led the company through multiple funding rounds. Her expertise in strategic growth, innovation has been vital to Rolodex success. And finally, my colleague Hugh McNaught, who I've known through investment and CEO cycles, is over 30 years of comprehensive experience in growth and technology-based companies in North America, the EU, UK, and Asia, combines significant profit and loss responsibility with solid strategic and tactical experience in global operations, finance, marketing, product development, innovation, operational experience in clinical diagnostics, radiopharmaceuticals. It's a tough one. Therapeutics, genomics, medical devices, digital health, wearable sensors, clean energy, and AI. There, we have our introduction to our fine panel. Let's give them a hand. So I'm going to ask each panelist to tell a really, really simple story, less than 30 seconds from each of them, how there was a significant contribution of patent to the success of one of their companies. So I'll start with Barry.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So at Spectrum, I learned a lot about the protection of IP because we licensed our IP from a British company, and they decided at the end of the license that they weren't going to renew it. And we were kind of forced to build our own IP stack, which functionally was identical to what they had. So we had to do that in a clean room environment, and protect $40 million of sales. And it was an interesting experience. When we got into Colligo, we decided that we were going to try to protect the IP more. So we started off from day one with a strategy of having all the engineers write everything in their notebooks with the idea that any good idea could get patented. And Lynn Bartram from SFU came over and helped us write about 9 patents. It's a long story. We ended up downsizing the company, and after the patents had been filed, I ended up becoming chief patent scientist in the company and actually shepherding them all through the US Patent Office, which was an interesting experience. But we ended up getting 7 granted and sold 3 to Intellectual Ventures and had another 4, which when we sold the company, it's interesting, there really wasn't a lot of value ascribed to those, even though we got a really good buck for the patents from Intellectual Ventures. So an interesting exercise. That money came at a very important time in the company's history, and we were able to buy out all the original investors with the money we got from the patent sale. So I would say I'm pretty happy with what we did, but it was an interesting and a long process.
Thank you, Barry, except I really did try to sell those patents to that guy, but he just didn't understand.
Yeah, I remember.
So Bijan,
I think they're probably still worth something.
Bijan, I know you have some stories, so why?
I'll start off by saying that I think this comment was made earlier. When you're talking about IP and you're talking about patents, it's really important to talk about, bear in mind copyrights, bear in mind trade secrets, bear in mind the whole sort of web of IP that you create around the company. In my case, I'll recount a couple of stories that I think will be relevant to this. We did at Infowave, and some of you, it's a long time ago, but some of you will know this. At Infowave, we had a significant number of patents. We ran into a situation where the company was not doing well, and we didn't need to do a financing. And we actually went to Research in Motion to sell some of the patents to them, and Research in Motion said, nope, we don't want them, and we don't think they have much value. So we went to a patent outfit in California, and we sold the patents. We sold 7 patents for about $10 million. The patent outfit sued Research in Motion and was awarded $450 million US. So that is pay attention. It's important. It's important. Patents are important. Don't dismiss them. They really do matter. At UB Video, it was an exit story. We had, again, patents. All my businesses have been back-end infrastructure, sort of software. And UVideo, the patent portfolio was critical in the valuation we got in the exit. So there was a whole IP team at Cisco. Scientific Atlanta is owned by Cisco. So Cisco's IP team came there, sat down at the table, and essentially in the negotiations, business units, signed up for a piece of the acquisition price, and the patent portfolio had a large chunk of that. So again, it was a direct consequence valuation to the exit, without any doubt. And the other thing I would say is, just a comment about what you were talking about earlier. You got to have a business plan, a business strategy. You got to decide what product you're building and what the product market fit is. That's sort of the thought. Then you got to get your IP strategy in order. They go hand in hand. One doesn't go before. You don't sit down and say, what patent am I going to write? You have to have that, and then you have to go and have a strategy around that. And we have at Ineco, we have patents that relate to our back end. We have patents that relate to our middleware, and we have patents that relate to our UI. And they're all interconnected, and there's a whole strategy around that. You have to think that through. You have to sit down with people who know and sort of deal with that. And one of the most important things for me is that we've had the same patent lawyer, throughout our history at Ineco. And this guy has changed firms 4 times. He went from Faskins to Gowlings, from Gowlings to McCarthy, and from McCarthy to his own label. It's critical to have that patent advisor, that patent lawyer. And that comment was made earlier too. That's me.
Well, for me, I will say I'm kind of in it at the moment. I wouldn't say that I have a whole ton of stories and examples in my past of where patents have been really important, but in the company that in Rotolyptic right now, it is the base of everything we do. We've got a patented geometry for the pump that we develop, and we are building the portfolio around that. It dovetails very, very closely with what we do in terms of business strategy, and that's part of what my role is. How do we marry the two? We are VC funded. Eventually, they do want to have a change of ownership. So a big piece of that is convincing somebody else, an OEM, that there is, to quote, like magic in the box, and that magic comes from our patent portfolio and how we've built it out and how we use it to determine, what markets we go into, or what we say our value propositions are, and how we sell into various operators and customers. It really is it's the fundamental base of everything that we do at this point. And if it weren't protected, if we hadn't have set it up initially and then grown it, we would have no hope. The company just wouldn't exist. That being said, in my role, I am definitely marrying the IP strategy with the business strategy, because they do kind of come hand in hand. And I'm known to be that annoying toddler that's like, well, we want to patent this. And it's like, okay, but why? What is the value in that? What is the market we can get into? How can we justify that is something that we truly need to patent and go down that path? Or, are we already decently protected and it's an incremental add-on that we don't necessarily need to spend those dollars on? So there is a bit of a tightrope line to walk for that. So yeah, I'm in it. I will have great stories in the next few years, but yeah, that's what it means for us.
Thank you. You?
Yeah, only one story. One that comes to mind was a company I was brought in to restructure. So unfortunately, I had to downsize from 40 employees down to 2 of us. Built up a patent portfolio of 18 patents. Wound up licensing that into another group in Israel and working with them to then float the company on NASDAQ. So the outcome to investors was about $300 million.
Thank you. I have to go back to Barry accusing me of not selling his patent for enough, but I did learn from that experience. So now I'm in negotiating for selling 2 other companies now, and my technique I now use is FOMO, which is fear of missing out. So I say, well, if you're not going to attribute any value to these patents, then you would have no trouble of the entrepreneur keeping them, right? And then they would say, no, 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 we want them. We want them. And then, well, then you got to include a price for them in the deal. Come on. So I have learned from that, Barry. So I know that a patent is crucial sometimes for attracting partners or joint ventures. I think that was partially explained by Bijan, but can you explain a little bit more about why having that proprietary technology makes it easier to form partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, if I give you an example again, like right now we're partnered with some pretty big outfits, FIS Global and NCR globally, and they look at your patent portfolio when you're in those negotiations at those levels, at a global level. They look at your patent portfolio. They want to see your patents be supportive. They want to see your patents fill gaps and provide technology in areas they don't have. That forms the foundation of the partnership and the revenue generation that comes out of that partnership. So if you're doing something significant, if you're putting a significant relationship together, it becomes an integral part of the discussion with them. And what you're looking for is white space. What you're looking for is filling a capability that they don't have. And it's not just the product, it's the ability to be able to have the product and have it be protected in the larger accounts they sell to.
Thank you. And then I want to ask Barry again. You'd sold the patent to Intellectual Ventures. Why don't you explain to people what a patent fund is and why they buy your patents? Because that's something a lot of people haven't heard of.
Well, Ivy is an interesting group. I haven't kept up with them recently, so admittedly, this is information from around the time we sold the patents. But it was founded by Nathan Myhrvold, I believe, and a bunch of other high net worth individuals that had been big names in the tech industry, with the idea that these large companies were always getting sued by little guys. Sometimes they'd be successful, sometimes not, but they were constantly trying to protect themselves from these patents. So they essentially built what amounts to a venture fund of, I don't know how many billions of dollars initially, but it was a lot of money at the time. It's probably not much now, given how much money goes into VC funds. But it was, I'll say $8 or something like that billion that they raised, with the idea of going out and buying a patent portfolio. The money they raised, the LPs in the fund essentially were Apple, I believe, Microsoft, Google, like all the names in the tech industry, the big names in the tech industry. And they decided, rather than fight with each other, they would share the patents that they had, that they purchased. So, they had, just like you have people that bring in deals to venture funds, they have essentially people go out into the industry looking for valuable patents, going back, making a pitch to their LPs about the value of that patent or that patent portfolio, and then eventually doing the deal, paying the company, and then licensing that to all their VCs, or their LPs. So very interesting model. And I don't know. I haven't kept up with them. Are they still pretty active, or?
Well, it started a whole industry of lots of these funds, but the funds are actually more specialized in certain areas now, whereas they were the first broad fund. But I understand a lot of the money came from Paul Allen, and when he passed away recently, it sort of froze their activities until they figured out how to settle his estate. So
Okay.
but the patent I sold was also sold to them, and so my innovation was something that's in the browser in your smartphone. So everyone uses a browser on their smartphone, uses something that I patented. So my wife always says to me, if everyone has a smartphone is using your patented technology, why don't we have a bigger house in Vancouver? But that was the trade-off.
I have to say, Intellectual Ventures as well, those outfits, the companies themselves, like Cisco acquiring patents from us in that purchase, or the companies themselves use these patents to trade with each other.
Right.
They try not to switch it. So they'll sit down and negotiate with their portfolios. It's a really important. It's not just an IV.
Well,
thing.
our customer when we were at Cligo in the early days was the legal department at Microsoft. And it was bigger than
There you go.
many of the engineering teams. Yeah, they spend, a lot of money defending and protecting themselves.
So I did a survey of about 30 entrepreneurs before this event that I knew that had patents, just to get some ideas. And a number of them said they felt as a startup they didn't have any power to enforce their patent to go after a big player. They didn't have, the fuel for that. And you mentioned that BlackBerry example.
Yeah.
Was it that you felt that you didn't have the fuel to go after someone, or maybe you could tell us the trade-offs there?
Yeah, we knew the patents had a great amount of value. We thought by approaching Research in Motion directly that they would see the light, right? It's certainly not. Jim Balsley absolutely was one guy who just walked out the room and slammed the door. Not so much Lazaridis, but Balsley did that. The answer is we had our backs against the wall. We needed a financing. We needed it fast. And the last thing we could do is sit down with our lawyers and come up with a strategy and go after them and try and do that. The business of a business is your business is to run your business. Your business isn't to be in the courts at the end of the day. And we had our backs against the wall at the same time. That's what we did. And the outcome was obviously not very, it was a pretty darn awful,
I was close.
that will go down in history, that one.
I was close with Jim around that time,
Yeah.
and I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But the irony of it all is all this new funding that's available for you to guys produce and to get some IP protection is on Jim Balsilli's initiative to lobby the government. So he did see the light.
He has seen the light. He was younger back then.
I wanted to ask Hugh, your background in biotech, pharmaceuticals. It's expected to have a patent. How is it different in that sector than the sectors that we just talked about in IT?
Yeah, I think as a general statement, and it was made earlier, commercial strategy is paramount, so it starts there. I think what flows out of that is understanding competitive positioning, competitive advantage, the IP landscape, whether you have freedom to operate. Definitely in life sciences, and particularly with pharmaceuticals, the holy grail is what we call composition of matter. So if you can actually patent the chemical structure, that absolutely constitutes a barrier to competition.
Now, is the license, do you have optionality in licensing where you could license that to many players, or is there usually just exclusive agreements?
Depending on the uniqueness of it, but I think the preference is unique agreements. And again, I think in that environment, what a licensee would be looking for is worldwide rights, sort of in perpetuity.
Which reminds me, I want to go back to that guy that we sold the patents to and buy him back if he doesn't value them. Because I actually noticed recently that there's some IoT stuff that need it.
By the way, something that you mentioned there sort of reminded me that one of our do not cross lines when we sold them to IV was that we had a worldwide exclusive, non-exclusive license to all the technology. So we could use the patents. But there was a big negotiation around whether or not we could resell those through to another, because you want those to be value of the company when the company gets sold, right? So eventually they agreed to that, but that was not an immediate agreement.
So I wanted to ask Steph quickly. She had mentioned that you have to ask them, why are we patenting this? How does the math for ROI work as the chief strategy officer?
I get the easy question, hey? You know what? There is no true, at least in my experience, magic formula for that. And I have learned a lot in the position I'm in managing some of our IP strategy, in the sense that, when we started, we first patented our base geometry. The ability to manufacture that in the way we needed to wasn't quite there yet. And so it was one of a really lovely silver lining of COVID is we managed to line up with a manufacturer who was able to do it really well for us. But we didn't know that we would have that at the time. So there is that balance of, okay, you may have this amazing idea we have a different way to reduce wear on our pump profile. And okay, do we patent that? Is it easy to manufacture? Well, no, not right now, but could it be in the future? Absolutely. You can do a bit of research. Is the ability to manufacture that kind of making its way there? If so, what is the value then to the market? So reaching out to our board of advisors, reaching out to SMEs in industry and the connections that we have and saying, hey, if we were able to do this, if we could make sure that, all of a sudden you've got a pump that lasts 10 years, is that something that is of value? And it's like, oh my goodness, yes. It's like, okay, let's move forward on that. So I think there is a balancing act, and you do have to do some additional research and additional digging to see where things are going, because stuff changes so quickly. What may not be possible now could very well be possible a few years from now, and all of a sudden those dollars are very worth it.
Okay, I interrupted you, Jen. Did you have?
No, all I was going to say is that there is no one size fits all with this stuff as well. Like, all of you in your businesses have to really think through what is the patent strategy, and it's going to be different for everybody. These sort of panel discussions give you a framework to be able to think through, but they don't actually, you've got to do your thinking. You've got to sit down and really look at your business, look at what you're doing. And it's really important in the sense that from a budgeting and cost point of view, the businesses that I've been in, certainly Ineco and UVideo, were patent heavy. So Ineco has approximately, we have over 30 patents now. And that's a lot of money to get these patents, to maintain them, to go through them. It's not light. And if your business is going to be, tech heavy, it's going to be IP heavy, and IP is important to it, you need to really think that through and understand how much money you're going to spend, what the benefit is, where you're going to get it. It's not no one size fits all, and it's very different depending on where you're at.
That reminds me of an important question I had for you, Bijan, which was that your business with Ineco right now is a lot about trust with fraud protection. So does then having these patents be part of that overall brand story that you're trying to develop?
For sure. And it is very much part of the partnership story that I said as well. The partners care about it. The customers care about it. We sold our one of our largest deals has been to Discover Cards so far, and they did a full analysis on what we've got in terms of our IP, in terms of our patents. Very, very important, for sure.
Okay, and there was something from Steph.
Yeah, I was just going to add a little bit to the previous comment, in the sense of, we've heard on other talks during the day today. It's as soon as you write it down, it's changed, right? So you do have to keep going back to it. You need to keep revisiting your strategy, how things marry up, where value sits, and it's an ever-changing process. You've got to have an environment where you're comfortable asking why or how or when. That those things do definitely matter, and you got to be willing and able to challenge, or like as a management team, you also have to develop your team in a way. So like our engineering team, they're amazing humans. They have incredible ideas all the time, and they do keep things fairly close to the vest. So there may be something that's like, okay, that could be the basis of a patent, but we're not quite there yet. We've protected ourselves as much as possible to ensure that we have a little bit of time to do the research, to see if there is a growth opportunity within it without losing that great idea in the process.
Thank you.
So one of the W's you didn't mention was where. And I think as patents begin moving forward, on an international level, this becomes a six-figure exercise per patent. So that definitely has to play into the calculation
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, and I would build on that. The where for us was really it is really impactful because ultimately, like I said, a lot of people, and I would assume a lot of people in the audience here, the end goal is potentially an acquisition. So who are the people that are potentially going to be those strategic partners or acquisition companies? Where do they operate? What is meaningful to them? Where do they need to be protected? And kind of keep that in your mind as you go through and you develop your strategy, because if you do the legwork, all of a sudden the value you bring is higher. I think it was mentioned earlier, if you don't, then they have to do that work, and the magical number that they give you is not necessarily what you want it to be. So food for thought.
So I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience.
Yes, I don't, is this mic on? Yes.
Hi, my question is for Bijan. So your business is cybersecurity. It is like manufacturing a lock, and the patenting involves disclosing how you are doing that. So how do you balance between keeping the mechanism of lock as a secret and your patent strategy?
I'm not a technical person myself, and we have our technologies. It is deep tech, but from our lens, when you patent something, you're patenting a capability. You're patenting. You can write it in a way that you're not actually. Patenting is different from implementing. So you got to distinguish between implementation, how you use the know-how, versus how you're explaining the know-how for the patent itself, right? Yeah, my CTO will give you a better answer than that.
So you guys were just absolutely legendary and so inspiring. What stories and so much legends. A lot of the new stuff is really interesting. So Stephanie, you provided a lot of that current flavoring of what's going on today. And Hugh, you got this immense like Rolodex of tangible, you have to patent stuff in that biotech world. So when you look at Barry, your experience, and Bijan, you're just like me, we're just the business side of it, right? And then when you look at Barry, you got it, the combination of it all. And a thesis to take away for everyone here is if we consider our thinking as the data set for the future, then how do we protect our thinking?
You've got to embed it in AI. Train a model and stick it in the cupboard somewhere. I don't know. I think, frankly, I think innovation is like what drives our industry, right? New thinking, being open. I mean, I think it's really interesting just being at the university now and being a student. Like I'm just a poor student now. And I'm watching as intellectual property is created every day, like on the whiteboard with a bunch of students sitting around a room, and and it's the antithesis of protecting IP, and particularly in AI right now, what's going on with everything is so open actually, and it's about the computing power, more than anything else. That's what protects your intellectual property. So I don't know if it's really a roundabout answer. I don't really have a good answer for how you protect your own brain, your own innovation, but maybe Bijan.
Yeah. I don't think I can add anything to that really.
I was entertained by the thought that he was a poor student after being a serial entrepreneur. But
I am just go in there every day. Like I'm just a slug. It's great. I love it. I'm not running anything.
I would say it's interesting here, the poor student. I recently finished a school program. And I don't know, the way I would interpret what you were saying is, what I try to do with my team is encourage a way of thinking. So how do you encourage that creativity? How do you get people to really build on each other, to, kind of feed off each other, to get those heads in the room, to really and that's, you can't put yourself in a magic robot and put you on the shelf and okay, that's all protected. It's really, what is the magic sauce? What makes you different? And sure, patents are absolutely important, but the people behind the patents are the ones that can keep developing them. So, for us, I very much challenge how, the engineering team around the table think. And I am that annoying toddler that says, okay, but why? Or how are we going to do this? Or, okay, you say you don't know. Well, what if you did know? What would that look like? And okay, well, how might we go about this? And it's allowing and really encouraging that creative approach to problem solving. And I'm constantly blown away by what the results end up being. And that's the basis of a lot of the patents that come out. We have one incredible individual whose brain works on a totally different level than I do. And he consistently is oh, cool, I've got this thing. And he just goes down these random rabbit holes. And he's been the base of a few of our patents now, just because he was curious and we give him the space to be curious. So
I just think to add to something you're saying is that you do have to have somebody who lives and breathes the strategy in your organization. I question it. I ask, where are we at with this patent, with that patent? What's the thoughts? Let's review, the sort of layers of patents we've got, etc. But really, I've been very fortunate that I've always had a couple of strong CTOs. I've worked with very strong CTOs, and they've been critical in terms of doing a lot of that questioning when the ideas are coming in, thinking the strategy through, and driving it and living and breathing it. Because otherwise, it stalls. For a small company, I mean, we're still pretty small. 30 patents is a lot. Those are granted. There's more filed. Those are granted patents, and so and the jurisdiction issues. That's another issue. We sell globally, so Europe. You got to think of everywhere that you're going to be, but you got to live and breathe it. The CTO or the one person in the organization. In you're CEO, CTO, you're everything, Barry, and you sort of the engineer, the lead, the founder, the entrepreneur. And Susan.
I've got one piece of perhaps experience that I can share. I might share is one of the things that Lynn Bartram, who did our patent stuff. I think Lynn.
Absolutely,
very smart
extremely.
person. And she at the end of the day said, before the engineers leave, I want you to write down everything you did today, any idea you had, and then sign the bottom of the page. That came in very, very handy when we were getting the patents, when we were defending the patents, to get them eventually granted, because it was evidence that we thought of the idea first. It's okay, there's this prior art here on this date that was published. Oh yeah, but wait a second, this guy wrote it in the notebook 3 years before that or 2 years before that. So that's a key.
One last question, but
Yeah, well, my comment to that is, even though I'm in finance now, I'm no longer an engineer. I still carry around a red notebook in my backpack everywhere I go, and every time I have an idea, I write it down and note it. Just like Barry said, it becomes part of you.
Hi, thank you very much for this panel. It's been absolutely great and really interesting. And I just want to give a shout out to Stephanie, who has more than held her own with this group of people who probably have an average of 40 years of experience. You are rocking it, sister. Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Well done. I have a question. This might be for you, but perhaps others might want to comment on it. I see sometimes within an ecosystem, so I'll use the example of life sciences in British Columbia right now, where there are a lot of companies bringing out from some similar research, lipid nanoparticles at UBC, for example. There's many other things, but let's use that one. And we are seeing some adversarial things happen in the courts as companies are quite similar to each other in how they're deploying this technology out of UBC. And I'm seeing the rub between good business practices and protecting your patents and establishing, your patent stable, but also the challenge of establishing an ecosystem that's supportive and helps each other and helps the province grow, brings GDP, things like that. So how do you play those two things? And are we sometimes perhaps a little bit too elbows up on patents? I'm just be interested in your thoughts, Hugh.
That's a tough one to address. Ultimately, this is a contact sport, so the patents do matter in the pharma world, and it is a very litigious environment. I can think of a number of examples, of companies that are extremely litigious, and quite often the point of initiating anything is when the earlier stage company gets to a threshold of 5 or 10 million in revenue. So you can be pretty far along and convinced that you're succeeding and then get whacked over the head. So I think that's sort of the reality of the environment globally. In our immediate ecosystem here, it would be nice to think we can be more collaborative. Maybe cooperation between companies. Quite often it's not a single patent that enables a product. So some cross-licensing or collaboration. Maybe that sort of addresses the point that you raise.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and you can almost get philosophical about it. My capstone project for school was around an innovation center focused on health science over at UVic, and yeah, there's a balance there. How much, because you can get to a point where you've got a great idea, you've got something that you thought you're good, you're running, the company's going, and then if you get a behemoth coming in, it comes down to your bank account and they can take you out. Yeah. And the people that pay for that, especially in biotech, can be people, right? Like it's that technology may never then make it to the market, and there's a real human cost for that. From my perspective, like we are lucky in a sense. It's very difficult where we're in, but we are a hard good. So the risk of somebody taking over, getting grumpy with us, or going into that, hand-to-hand combat is not incredibly high. But with all the companies that I did interview in biotech, it's a balancing act, and it is really difficult, and there is absolutely a cost to the way that the system is set up right now. And, hopefully something may change, but it's not an easy problem to solve for sure.
So the other thing I would mention related to that is one of my inventions wasn't patented, but it was contributed to an industry consortium. And I had a company called Telescape in Vancouver that was one of the first video conferencing companies in the world in the early 1990s. So it was a situation where if we hadn't contributed that technology, and Intel contributed, and Motorola, and about 3 or 4 other companies all contribute something and create an industry standard. If that hadn't occurred, you wouldn't have, Zoom today, or Teams, or all the video conferencing you do today. Maybe that would make my life better, but that was the decision that was made, and I had a tough time explaining it to my investors at the time. That I was basically giving this away, but in order to create a market in which we could monetize. There's not enough of that thinking anymore. Too much of the companies today are thinking that they can vertically integrate and do everything by themselves, right? Sometimes we make decisions that have to contribute IP as a consortium in order to move the industry forward.
All right, we are at time. Anything else you'd like to say to wrap up?
If they want the slides, QR code.
Well, thank you for this very esteemed panel, and Jeff for moderating. Thank you very much.